Bienvenidos! Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing today? My name is Mariana. You are watching Mexico Relocation Guide. My guest today is Brett Lamar, who some of you might recognize. Maybe you have gotten insurance through him. Today's topic is one of those topics that we get so many emails about. Can I get health insurance in Mexico? Does my pre-existing condition allow me to get health insurance or not? What is the cost of health insurance? So many questions, and really important questions, because they can be a deal breaker for some people, whether they're going to move to Mexico or not based on these things. So with me, I have the expert Brett Lamar, who has been doing this for years, helping expats all over Mexico get their insurance, their private insurance policies, to help them get coverage in Mexico. Brett, thank you so much for being here today.
Mariana, thank you for inviting me, and bienvenidos to everybody out there. I don't know if you're on Mexico Relocation Guide or you're on YouTube, but thank you for joining us this evening. And I hope we can answer some of your questions that is of interest to you in regards to short-term or long-term insurance regarding
Yep.
to your health.
Yeah. So if you guys are new around here and you have no idea how to post a question, there's a button that says live chat. Go ahead and start posting your questions. I do have a couple of questions for Brett that I'm going to ask him. So some of the frequently asked questions that we get, but maybe that'll get the juices going for some of you guys watching at home on what it is that you want to know. And we'll try to get to as many as we can within the hour. So with that, let's give some of our followers a bienvenida. Hello, thank you so much for being here, Bill. Callow, nice to see you today. Hi, Lisa. New Jersey in the house, love it. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here. Christine, hello everyone. Thank you all for being here early and posting some of your questions from Ecuador. Nice. Nice. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for saying hi to us. We're just going to get started. Brett, why don't you introduce yourself to anybody who doesn't know who you are, or a little bit about your background and your insurance company?
Okay, well, my name is Brett Lamar, obviously, and I come from the United States. I was living in Denver, Colorado, before I made the move to Mexico. I'm a former United States Marine. I served in the Marine Corps for 4 years. And I moved to Mexico, I believe it's been like almost 9 years, about 8.5 years ago. Actually, next month will be my anniversary in June of moving to Mexico. And after I got out of the Marine Corps, I had launched a tech company that was involved in online marketing. And my wife and I, Brooke, had ran that for a good over 20 years before we had sold the company and thought we'd make the move to Mexico. Mexico, although is not our first living abroad experience, we also used to live in Bangkok, Thailand for about 3 years. And we were living there while we were working in the tech industry. But we sold our company and thought we'd move to Mexico and take a bit of a breather. Well, that breather lasted all of about a year before I'm like, there's no way this guy is going to sit and play golf all day or go to the beach every day, or the typical things that you do when maybe you're in your 60s or so, and I'm not to that age yet. So I thought, how can I reinvent myself? And I started applying to remote jobs that I could do here in Mexico. And, I have a strong background in sales, communication, being in the tech industry and running my own company, and the work ethic of being in the Marine Corps. And I got hired by a company called Expat Insurance. At that time, it was called We Expats, but we've rebranded to Expat Insurance because we've been able to acquire that domain. And they sent me up to the United States to get licensed, because all the brokers that work within our firm are all expats, number one. And number two, they're remote workers. So working away. Some work in like co-work spaces, some work in their home offices. some work in the home office back in San Miguel, and we got licensed in the state of Texas, is where I received my insurance license. And then I went through all the training, and now I've been doing insurance in Mexico, primarily in health and life. Just being that an expat, a foreign national, cannot sell P&C, which P&C is like auto, boat, home, condo insurance. We can only sell health and life, but we do have agents within our company that are Mexican nationals that do all the P&C. But myself, health number one and life number two.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that only Mexican nationals could be the ones to sell auto insurance and those other things. So good to know.
Yeah, we can quote it, but we cannot issue the policy nor service the policy as a foreign national.
Okay. Now, for anybody wondering, like, why would there's insurance agents and brokers across Mexico throughout every single state, every single city. You can insure somebody regardless of whether they live in Mexico City or Cancun or Los Cabos. Can you give us some insight into that? Like, does it matter where somebody lives as far as expatiinsurance.com is concerned?
No, expat insurance can be basically what it is international insurance. Can be sold to anyone living away from their home country of passport. Specific companies work in specific regions. So we have some companies that will only insure you in Mexico, some companies that will cover you worldwide, excluding the United States, some that will do worldwide, including the United States. But as far as eligibility goes, some require you to have your temporary or permanent residency, while others will allow you to purchase just with your tourist visa. Although all the insurance companies, if you're doing annual insurance, annual major medical, they do require that you have 6 months of time spent in Mexico, if Mexico is your country of residence, to where you want to register the residence of your policy. That does not have to be consecutive. It just has to be cumulative over the policy year. So you have to be in Mexico for 6 months.
Got it. I guess that's to prevent maybe just somebody using it just for the sake of medical tourism or something like that.
Correct. Because if you're just using it for short term, then that would be an emergency medical policy that is for specific dates of travel.
Now, before we get really into like all the intricacies of, the regulations for these policies, would you mind giving people, a lot of people have no idea that the medical insurance process is very different than wherever they're coming from. So would you mind giving people an idea of how it's different? Let's say if you're coming from Canada or the United States versus Mexico.
Well, we could probably spend a whole hour on this topic.
Sure.
I'll try and keep it short and to the point.
Yeah, maybe
and
just
if anybody wants to inquire.
3 bullet points.
Yeah. So basically, first and foremost, annual policies are fully underwritten, which means you have to disclose all of your medical history. So if you have pre-existing conditions, there is a chance that they could cause an automatic denial. They could be excluded from coverage, or they could be restricted with a deductible load or a premium increase. And then there are other pre-existing conditions, specifically thyroid issues, that are usually included in coverage. And there are some other conditions that can be included, but many conditions can cause those three things. There's actually, it blows people's minds, there's over 40 conditions that cause auto denials.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I would say that's very, very different is just the processes of how a direct pay or a reimbursement is handled. It's like, coming from socialized medicine in Canada, you have free healthcare, but there's long wait periods, and For certain tests, if it's non-emergency, it's a long time to get care. In the United States, we've made a lot of progress with healthcare in the United States since the Affordable Health Care Act, but it's still, the processes abroad are very, very different, and without an agent are a nightmare to handle. And caveat, if you go directly to the insurer, or if you go directly to somebody like me or another agency, we don't charge, nor does the insurer charge for our services. We're paid by the insurance company, so there's no premium to use an agent. But we kind of provide a concierge type service to the policy for like translation services, help with claims assistance with direct billing agreements, and such and so forth.
So essentially what you're saying is there's really no benefit in you trying to work with the insurance company directly and foregoing the broker or the agent. You're not going to save any money. And in reality, it's a benefit to you to have somebody who understands the medical insurance jargon, right, to help you navigate the claims process and all that.
Correct. And we already have relationships as agent brokers with a lot of the providers, which providers are the hospitals. So we already have kind of a reputation, no direct contacts, who to contact within the insurance company. I was just recently in Dominican Republic for a conference with one insurer, to where I'm there with the whole corporate team, knowing everybody from the CEO company down to the claims processors. And every insurer that we work with, we try to get to know that corporate structure to have a relationship with the insurer, just to facilitate and expedite processes.
Another thing that people don't realize is, insurance does usually have waiting periods for some things. So an insurance agent is also your liaison in explaining these things to you. So there are no surprises.
Correct. Yeah, the waiting periods can be anywhere from 30 days up to 120 days before the full benefits kick in. And then if you're working with like Mexican insurers, there's very long waiting periods for certain conditions, just because a lot of people come to me and they're like, I just want insurance in Mexico. I want to work with a Mexican insurer, but you're going to be working in peso. The entire policy is going to be in Spanish. Any people that you coordinate with is going to be in Spanish. And again, it's meant for Mexican nationals. So they're thinking that the people that are coming on board are young and are going to grow with the policy, to where they can wait for these waiting periods before they're covered for, say, a heart attack, a stroke, cancer, things like that, to where these international style policies, the longest waiting period of any company that we have is 120 days before you're covered for pretty much anything under the policy.
Yeah, important for people to understand that and know that. So some people wonder, like, why does insurance vary so much from one company to the other as far as cost? Primarily cost, maybe because they don't understand all the, the variables that go into how insurance is priced in Mexico. So would you mind just sharing some of the variables? I mean, I know one of them is definitely age. Maybe some other things that go into how cost is calculated.
Well, I would say cost is calculated from, number one, the age. Number two, your deductible that you're going to choose, which is the liability that you're going to take before the insurer starts paying. Some companies have co-insurance on top of the deductible. So you always want to make sure what that co-insurance caps out at, so your max out of pocket per policy year. Another factor would be the sum insured amount. Like, do I have a lifetime cap on my policy? Do I have an annual cap on my policy? So that's a big factor. So you have some policies that are very limited in coverage, like they have caps on cancer coverage. They only cover up to $200,000 per year. They have, low daily limits for therapy or outpatient care, outpatient surgeries. So there's many facets to a policy that will determine what that premium is going to be. But when you're looking at apples to apples, like if you're seeing a policy from company A to a company from policy B that is very, very similar in coverage, it's highly likely that their premiums are going to be very close because all of these insurers use actuaries, which are very statistical, mathematical people that analyze groups of large numbers to come up with these premiums.
I see. Does location play a part in that role just because of the tier of hospitals that you might have available to you and things like that?
With the international policies, no.
Okay.
You're going to get treated the same in Puerto Vallarta as you would in Querétaro. So you're going from a very heavily populated tourist and expat destination to very few expats. It's the same level of service, although the hospitals in more of those expat cities tend to charge very high inflated rates. Just they like to take advantage of the dollar and the Canadian dollar, unfortunately. So that's why it's always best to have an insurance company involved, because we are there to work with the international billing departments to negotiate those rates to make sure that your care is coming within UCR, which is usual, customary, and reasonable charges for the geographical area that you're receiving the coverage in, because you are going to pay more for services in Puerto Vallarta. But it's the insurance company that's paying for them after you have your client liability than you would in Querétaro. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, that's just the reality.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I can't commend you enough. That's another benefit of having a liaison or an agent on your side who is going to help prevent you from getting possibly taken advantage of because they might see, that you carry dollars versus pesos. So it's a reality of the way that things sometimes work in Mexico, guys. Don't get upset about it. It's just, we're trying to help educate you. Now, there are some age caps for private insurance in Mexico. And, a lot of the people watching our channel are probably either at retirement or near retirement age. So, those people are probably still well within the age of being able to get insurance in Mexico. But what are some age caps or age maximums that people can no longer get private insurance in Mexico?
Pretty much 99% of the policies have to be applied for prior to your 75th birthday. So as long as you apply prior to your 75th birthday, you have guaranteed renewability and coverage for life of that policy. A lot of the times when we as agents deliver these quotes, that number 74 is on the quote. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, what am I going to do after 74? I'm not going to have any coverage. No, that is the eligibility cap. So you have to apply before that birthday of 75. We do, for the very wealthy expats, have 2 senior policies, but you're talking to secure a policy after the age of 75 with a $5,000 deductible, you're looking at about $12,000, $13,000 a year in premium.
Yeah, that's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, I'm assuming, at that age group end up just paying out of pocket if they didn't get grandfathered into a policy, and then just, save that amount of money every month. If in case something happens, they have that extra cash.
Correct.
Yeah. Would that be your advice?
My advice would be don't move to Mexico unless you have a good nest egg for your healthcare if you're going to self-insure. Because I've ran into so many situations with GoFundMe campaigns and families, and it's not legal for these hospitals to hold somebody hostage, but for somebody that don't speak the language and doesn't have an advocate on their behalf, it can be a very, very uncomfortable situation to where it's going to be very difficult to get discharged until full payment is made. Because you as a foreign national, you have to understand they're a private company. They're not subsidized by the government of Mexico. No private hospitals in Mexico are government ran. nor do they have government control. And I'm talking specifically private hospitals,
Mhm.
because that's where we would be using the insurance at. So once you're discharged, they have no recourse of collection from you. You could just take off. So, back 10 years ago, 8 years ago, they kind of did like an IOU as soon as if they had a certain amount, but just too many hospitals were getting burnt and their loss ratios were way too high. So they're literally like, no, you need to call up your relatives. You need to get a credit card. You need to do a GoFundMe campaign. You need to do whatever you can to get this bill paid, and they'll put security at your door and things. I don't mean to scare anybody. I've just been involved in many of these situations.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
I think it's
say,
good to know these things.
yeah. So I say, like, yeah, if you're going to retire abroad and you're going to go the self-insure route, uh, make sure you have a good nest egg, a credit card with a high credit limit, and a good emergency plan. Like, because a lot of people are just like, I'll buy medical evacuation insurance, and if I have a problem, I'll just go. Well, there's many situations to where an evacuation can't take place.
Mm.
It's three people that need to sign off on an evacuation. It's the attending physician of where you're being treated, the receiving attending physician, and then the medical director of the air ambulance company. So if all three of them don't agree it's your best interest to be evacuated, then you're going to receive care where you are. And the last thing you want to have done is not be able to pay for the care in private hospital and get, if you don't have the care, all they'll do is stabilize you and then transport you to regional. And I suggest anybody to go and take a tour of the regional hospital in what area they're in. I'm not talking about EAMS, I'm talking about regional, because
Mhm.
EAMS is a whole different story. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, there are so many, YouTubers or bloggers that, commend Mexico for having free healthcare and free medical facilities. And you guys, the reality is these medical facilities are, one, understaffed. Two, they don't always have medications on staff. Three, their equipment isn't always working. There's really long lines. They're meant for impoverished people. If that is
You're, you're,
absolutely your
you're
last
in a
choice,
room with like 6 to 10 other people.
yeah,
Sometimes
you
you
don't
don't
get
have
a
a
private
hospital
room.
bed. You're on a floor on an air mattress. You have to have your family members bring food in for you. I mean, like, it's a reality that I just don't
Yeah.
believe people really pay attention to before they make their strategy to move abroad.
Yeah, it's not nice. It's not a nice hospital in most cases.
Yeah.
Um, so, if that's your absolute last recourse, then, by all means. But if you're moving to Mexico and you're looking at, really taking care of your future, have some savings if you're going to self-insure. I've seen it all too much, Brett, where I see so many people have GoFundMe campaigns because maybe they fell and they broke a hip or something and they weren't able to pay the hospital bill. And it really does make me really sad that, these people are trying to heal and they have that burden now of trying to pay their hospital bill because they didn't think it would, cost so much. So anyway,
Right. And I commend you for doing this and getting the word out there, because the worst situation is for people to find this out after they relocate, because they're like, oh my God, I've sold all of my assets. I, have everything in Mexico. I had no clue about any of this situations. What am I going to, and it's just too late at that point. I mean, it's very hard to repatriate back to the United States after you've already sold everything. So I commend you for getting this out there, trying to get it to a largest audience as possible.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for being here. If you guys don't know this, by the way, Brett Lamar can be reached at brettlamar.com. He has it at the signature of his title at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to go to that website and get a quote from him. So we have a couple of questions coming in. You ready to take some questions?
Sure.
Awesome. Hello, Dovey. Thanks for being here. So
You're going to have to read it to me because I can't see it on. I don't have my glasses on and it's too small.
I will read it out to you. Don't worry. I will read it out to everybody. Is it feasible to enroll in private insurance even before moving? So for at least 6 months out of the year in order to not be excluded by waiting until age 70?
Okay, so I'm trying to see if I understand that question correctly. So, what a lot of people will do is, for example, they'll get quotes from me prior to their relocation, and each one of those quotes will have the waiting period on it. And then they will pick an effective date that starts prior to the date of their arrival. So that waiting period is exhausted on the day that they arrive. You can't use the insurance during that period because you won't be here, and it can't be used in your home country until you've actually came to Mexico. Because, for instance, Canadians have coverage built into a lot of these policies back in Canada, but they had to receive their policy in Mexico first before they can use it back in Canada. A lot of US citizens exclude US coverage unless they're a younger expat, to where a lot of US citizens will have that effective date start early to exhaust that waiting period. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Okay.
I believe so. Dovey, feel free to follow up with us and let us know if that answers your question. But yeah, I guess what I understand is essentially you could set, the post date to be in a future time frame, so
Yeah.
the policy can't be used before that.
Yeah, I think that they said something about 6 months early. That'd be way too soon. The soonest that we can start an application before the effective date is 45 days. But also, if you're back to that eligibility that we talked about of 74, after the age of 65, you're also required to do medical exams. And those medical exams need to be submitted with the application. So there's some date constraints on those medical exams to where they won't accept, like, for example, your blood work unless it's within the last 90 days. So 6 months would be way too early to secure a policy.
That's great information. Normally, are these labs done, test labs done? I'm assuming a list of laboratories that the hospital or the insurance company is okay working with.
Actually, all the international insurers will allow you to do the exams back home or here in Mexico. Of course, it's going to be more expensive probably back home because it's just going to be routine, not for medical diagnosis. So we usually have medical facilitators that we work with here to order the labs and schedule the appointments for you because it can get pretty extensive on some of the insurers.
Especially if you don't speak Spanish and you need to know what the name of all these laboratorios are, or what all these lab tests are called.
Yeah,
Um,
we have them in English for them.
that's awesome. That's great. Speaking of that, I know there's a lot of people who are snowbirds and they might only spend 6 months out of the year in Mexico. I'm assuming you've probably gotten this question before. What happens in that case? Can somebody just get a 6-month policy?
Yeah, that would be a short-term emergency medical policy. For U.S. citizens, we work with specifically one company with U.S. citizens just because it covers pre-existing conditions. So you're guaranteed, highly likely, if you're admitted for 24 hours or more, it's going to be direct bill rather than a reimbursement. To where usually with short-term travel medical policies, they're usually all done on a reimbursement basis because they exclude pre-existing conditions. And because they don't vet the client before you buy them, the vetting process is done after the claim. So it's usually all through reimbursement to make sure that you do not have the condition was not related to a pre-existing condition.
I see.
So we do have them. Canadians, we have pretty solid short-term travel medical for. There's also sometimes in certain situations, I recommend a specific company that is done only in Canada. You wouldn't be working with me. You would be working directly with that company in Canada. But that's only in very specific situations. I usually do have an option for Canadians as well.
Okay, good to know. So there you go, guys. It doesn't matter if you're watching us from Canada, the United States, Brett can still help you. A lot of people take medications, and one of the things that always comes up is, what about my medications? Will they be covered?
Well, medications would usually be related to a pre-existing condition.
Hmm.
So highly likely, no. Because if it's a prescribed medication, for example, like a cholesterol statin would be related to dyslipidemia. Blood pressure medication would be related to arterial hypertension. Metformin would be related to diabetes. So all of those, if you're not over the age of 65, will trigger what's called a cardiovascular questionnaire, a diabetes questionnaire. So that has to fully be underwritten. And then we go back to pre-existing conditions. They can be cause of denial, they can cause an exclusion or a restriction, or in unique cases, included in the coverage.
I see. So even if the condition is developed after you've been insured,
No. If the condition develops underneath the policy while you're insured, you have guaranteed coverage of any condition that develops underneath the policy for life. And then you would have a prescription benefit for that as well.
got it. However, if you're looking to get insurance just to be able to buy your prescription medications because you had that pre-existing condition, that would obviously be a no.
Yeah, I mean, we do have some high net worth clients that I have to have my pre-existing conditions covered. And we do have a policy out of the United States that will insure pre-existing conditions, but you're paying a very, very significant premium for those. So if you're a high net worth individual, but now we're talking again up to the $10,000, $15,000 a year
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah,
insurance.
very high for sure. And it might be worth it for you if you're watching at home and you have something where it's like very cost prohibitive for you to pay for it out of pocket every month. It might absolutely be worth it for you. But there might be a lot of people who it's not. I fully understand that.
Yeah,
Um,
we do have quite a few clients that do that. Usually it's people with a heart exclusion. They're like, "Do you have any options for me?" And that would be the option because a heart attack or a stroke can be significant cost compared to what the premium is.
yeah. What are some other mistakes that you see people make in regards to their medical care in Mexico? If you don't mind sharing, just like maybe a couple of things that you've seen along your years of helping people that could have been avoided.
Call 911.
Hmm.
Uh, I think you should actually have an emergency plan and make a relationship with the hospital that you already have history with, because every single hospital has an ambulance service attached to their hospital to where you're going to get somebody dispatched to you much, much faster than if you would call 911. Because 911, sometimes it's the bomberos that come, sometimes it's the Red Cross that comes, sometimes you're waiting for a while. And if it's not an emergency, taxi or Uber. I mean, like if it's like not life threatening,
Sure.
taxi or Uber with the assistance of somebody. But I think one of the best advice is a lot of people call 911 and then they can't speak Spanish. There isn't an English speaker on the other line. And then they're frantic because they don't know what to do and they don't have that backup plan.
Yeah, so plan ahead of time. I think that's great advice. Yeah, definitely make a relationship with a doctor. That should be one of the first things you do when you arrive in Mexico. Start building a relationship with a local doctor. And like
Yep.
Brett said, they can probably give you the number to an ambulance that they recommend. Or if you're already going to a medical facility where they have ambulances and this doctor happens to practice there, then find out what their ambulance phone number is. I
Right.
think that's really good advice.
Thank you.
Um, so somebody wants to know, it'd be great to hear which carriers you find to be most cost effective of the Mexican domestic carriers. So maybe you can talk about some of the carriers that you recommend or that you happen to quote a lot of.
I mean, I would say like our top five companies that we work with are Vumi, Redbridge, BMI, Morgan White, and GeoBlue. Those are probably the top five companies that we work with. Vumi has very attractive pricing for 60 and below, but gets very expensive after 65. Redbridge has very streamlined rates, not too significant of age increases. Morgan White has some very good, I call them more catastrophic plans because it's a very low sum insured amount with restricted caps on benefits. The Geo Blue is going to be for those people that want the Cadillac of coverage, and then BMI is going to be for the people that just want coverage in Latin American only or want U.S. coverage built into their policies.
That's a good point. What if somebody is traveling outside of Mexico? Maybe it doesn't have U.S. health coverage, but do most of these plans have then coverage in other countries?
Yeah, the majority of them have the same coverage that you would have in Mexico, anywhere else abroad, excluding the United States. It's so a lot of people are like, does that mean I don't have to buy travel insurance anymore? And it's no, you don't have to buy travel insurance anymore. And a lot of these companies have what's called a travel assistance rider built into it. And it covers you for the first $10,000 of emergency medical services away from your resident country, which would be Mexico, since we're on Mexico Relocation Guide, Mexico, even back to the United States or anywhere outside of Mexico that you would travel to, you're covered for the first $10,000 of emergency medical services with no deductible.
Wow.
So there is those riders built into some of those policies.
Yeah, considering, a lot of Latin American countries happen to have very affordable medical services. So, assuming you're traveling within Latin America or maybe even Asia for that matter. But yeah, that's great. That's actually a really good benefit. Sorry, Brett, you were going to say something.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I say everybody always should do their own research. And then I always say that, always make sure you're completely upfront with whoever you're buying it. So you know exactly how that policy works and read your policy. I mean, I can't believe how many people just don't sit down and read their policy on how it works. I mean, we try to go over so much, but it might take you, a couple hours a day on the weekend to go over your 45-page conditions of coverage, just so you really understand your policy as well, because there is a responsibility that you as the insured has as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to something that Kathleen brings up that I think is something interesting for a lot of people is long-term care. So, the concept of having like physical therapy or ongoing therapy in the US or maybe even Canada is something that is usually included in your insurance policy. How does that work in Mexico?
Well, there's in the United States, we sell long-term care policies. Those are not sold abroad. That's basically like when you need to be in an assisted living home or a nursing home or something like that. We don't provide insurance for those types of care, but we do provide therapy benefits and rehabilitation benefits built into the policies. But nothing such as there's nothing on the market for long-term care at this point. There are some long-term care facilities that are located in heavily dense populated expat areas, but you would need to sit down with them and see if they have some type of like an expense plan that you can work on with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry, maybe I understood it as just as more of a ongoing like chronic healthcare, not necessarily. And I understand it now. It's more of like, maybe even palliative care or assisted living facility. So I fully understand that.
There is palliative care built in some of the policies, but it's usually limited to 30 days.
Okay, I understand. So somebody, I don't know if I understand this question. If I have a pre-existing condition and get an auto denial, will that be the same for every insurance company or broker? Oh, got it. So can they basically insurance shop if they get denied by one insurance company?
What I suggest with my clients that have a high risk for an exclusion is apply to one, two, three different insurers at the same time to see who's going to give you the best offer. Like I said, all of these companies have actuaries, and some of them take on more risk than others. Some of them change the risk that they accept this month to next month. It's just always a whole statistical game. So rather than apply and get denied, or apply and get if you apply and get an exclusion, you don't have to reveal that to another insurer. But if you apply and get denied and then you reapply to somebody else, there is a question that says, have you ever been denied by another insurer?
Mm. Yeah, and I guess
Makes
I
sense?
mean, it's important for you to be upfront. Absolutely. You don't want to end up getting denied later when you actually need it. So yeah, that makes sense. Somebody's wondering if we're talking about US policies that cover you in Mexico and not Mexican policies. So they are underwritten in the United States that have coverage in Mexico, correct?
Some of the policy, I mean, all of the policies that I'm talking about usually have a headquarters in the United States, but some of them are incorporated in the United States. Some are in Puerto Rico, some are in Barbados, some are in Turks and Caicos. There's offshore benefits to having offshore companies with taxes and such. But as far as what this specific person is asking, they're asking about Mexican policies. And as we previously spoke about, remember those have waiting periods. They're usually all in Spanish. They're priced in pesos. They do have very restricted networks to where you have to go to specific hospitals, doctors, things like that, and the long waiting periods for pre-existing conditions. Again, I cannot sell Mexican policies. I can quote them, and once you would agree to it, I'd pass you off to one of my Mexican national licensed brokers that would facilitate the rest of that process and service your policy. Many of those policies, some of the agencies, the Mexican brokers, they are only on the sales end of it, and then you have to work directly with the insurer on the service end of it. So they don't provide that concierge service. Some of them do, some of them don't, but that's just something to think about. A lot of people always think it's going to be cheaper. 9 times out of 10, it's more expensive to go with a Mexican national policy. Because remember, they're geared and set up for people to secure them when they're young and grow with the policy, because they're written for Mexican nationals, not for you retiring here at 50, 55, 65, 70. So that's where you have to remember. Also, a lot of people will say, I'm from Canada. Why am I paying in US dollars? Well, it wouldn't matter. All these policies are based on US dollars. So whatever that currency is for that day, convert it to Canadian dollars, and that's what it'd be priced at if it was priced in Canadian dollars. So it's not like you're getting charged a premium just because it's charged in US dollars. If they priced it in Canadian, it would be whatever the exchange rate of whatever it would be that day for the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, I know. And it's just the optics of it, right? Some people,
Right.
it hurts, right? Knowing that like you have to pay a 30% on top of that because you're
Exactly. Oh, I get it. Uh-huh.
I fully understand it too.
Mhm.
Um, oh, so how long before you move abroad to Mexico should you start paying for insurance? I mean, personally, I would think right away.
Yeah, I think you should have a plan set up like right away. Yeah. I mean, if what I recommend to a lot of people is do the trial period, know what's going to go in the long period, but just get like a short-term emergency travel policy for like 6 months. So at least you're secured for that first 6 months while you're shopping for a long-term option to transition into.
So just to recap a couple of the things that we've talked about so far, most of the insurance policies that expatinsurance.com or Brett Lamar manages can insure you up to age 74 if you're a new policy holder. Obviously, if you are 70 years old and you turn 74 in 4 years, you're not going to get kicked out automatically. You get grandfathered in as long as you don't obviously lie about your pre-existing conditions or have something that could, get you denied. Um, the other things that you have to consider is some of these policies require you to be a resident in Mexico, some do not. Um, and there are different kinds of policies, whether you want an international underwritten policy or a policy written in Mexico, underwritten in Mexico. And those have differences, like what he talked about, waiting periods, the tier of hospitals that you're allowed to go to, which in the United States we know as in-network, right? Um, and a bunch of other things like what your premium is and your cap or what the policy will pay at a maximum amount of benefit. What else did I miss, Brett, that I think might be useful for people to recap?
I just can't stress enough how important it is to just do your due diligence, speak to as many people as you want. I'm not saying come to me 100%. I mean, like compare me against other people, but doing your due diligence before you make such an extreme change in your life, because it is going to be something that could affect your life so much if you don't have a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And do your due diligence on everything, not only medical insurance,
Right.
but
Oh, yeah.
you have to do your research. This isn't just, it's your lifestyle. But especially, I think with Medicare or with medical insurance, it's particularly important. We talked about some of the pre-existing conditions that are declined, but if you want to know specifically something that pertains to you, I would suggest that you reach out to Brett. What can they expect working with you? Like, what would that process be like?
Well, first of all, when somebody contacts me, whether it be through my website, WhatsApp, or email, the first thing I do is I give them a discovery email. We can also, if people prefer a phone call rather than replying to the email, we can set up a discovery email. But there's just important information that I need from you. Are you looking for a short term, long term? Do you have any pre existing conditions? Are you taking any medications? Um, just things like that will gear me and allow me to kind of know which policies might work the best. I usually try to give people like three different options, from a top tier to a middle tier to a lower tier offer of a policy. Within that quote will be the coverage details, as well as the premiums that align with the deductibles, and then the different payment frequencies: annual, semi-annual, quarterly, or monthly. Once they choose a policy, then if we have to go through medical underwriting, I would give them all those medical underwriting requirements to get done and work with them on their behalf to get those accomplished. And then we would submit the application. Majority of the applications are done online now. Although if a person isn't comfortable doing something online, again, I can schedule a call and just do that with them over the phone. We usually get an offer back from an insurer if it's called a standard approval. That means they have a clean medical history, same day to next day. If it's a standard approval. If there are some medical underwriting requests, we usually get those back within 72 hours, sometimes 96 hours. And then we have to fulfill those requests within 30 to 45 days, depending on the insurer.
So, sorry.
Okay, so once we fulfill those requests, then they come back with the offer. And that, like I said, the standard approval is going to be same day, next day. If it's going to require some underwriting and some medical history, we get that offer back, and then the offer is given to the client, and then they can rebuttal that offer to ask for something better, like they want a deductible load rather than a premium increase or something like that for the exclusion, or we accept the offer and the policy gets issued. But they have to understand those restrictions or exclusions prior to accepting and paying for the policy.
And I assume when they get that policy and their explanation of benefits, it has some information on what happens during a claims process, or do you give them some education around that? What happens if, they need to actually go to a hospital?
Well, I always tell all of my clients, they all have my WhatsApp and my personal number and email. If they're stabilized, always make sure I'm involved so I can make sure the process is getting facilitated. I work 365 days a year. So they never hesitate contacting me 24 hours a day. I'm always available. I also give them the conditions of coverage, which is how they use their policy. And it's basically explains everything from how your deductible works, how your coinsurance might work if that's included, how we do an appeal, what some exclusions may be in the policy, if they want to cancel their policy, how's the return process work. So all that's explained in the conditions of coverage. But first and foremost, I like to be their first point of contact whenever they're stabilized.
Yeah. So it's important to have somebody like Brett that can give you this much personal attention because, yeah, in a panic, that would be very important to have.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times I'm still amazed that people give out their personal phone numbers to attend medical emergencies. And that's just something that's so different than a lot of us are used to, right? That spent most of our adult life in the United States or Canada for that matter. So
Like the doctors and physicians here, primarily when you see a doctor, if you have a surgery, you have their personal contact information, and they even follow up with you afterwards. Like the follow-up care here is second to none. You're not being seen by nurse practitioners, rushed through with a doctor just coming in and seeing what the nurse did. You usually get an hour with a doctor whenever you see a doctor of personal attention.
Yeah, it makes you feel so human.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You're not just a number, another cow getting through the line.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I've been a client patient myself. I've had 2 surgeries here in Mexico, and just you always have like a private room. The level of care from, like I said, the doctors, the nurses is just unbelievable. Usually get like a nutritionalist to where you have a diet plan while you're in there. I mean, it's almost like staying in a hotel, but a medical facility.
Yeah. Food is good. The level of care is really good.
Yeah.
I agree. Somebody has a really good question, and I think earlier you said if you are going to be paying out of pocket, it's important for you to have a really good nest egg or have a credit card with a high amount, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is that? That's very like large. That's a big statement. So just what do you have any advice on what is like the minimum some people should save?
I mean, like that's a really hard question. I would say, like in a critical care position to get stabilized, so you can hopefully get evacuated. I'd say, like, geez, I mean, there's so many situations.
Yeah, I
I'd say
know.
like $25,000. Yeah, I'd probably say like 25,000 US. I mean, what you have to understand, even if you have insurance, when you go into an emergency type situation in the hospital, to where you're going to be admitted, you're going to have to put down it's called a hold. It's like opening up a tab at a bar or a restaurant or something like that. While they don't charge your card, they just hold an amount until they can verify all of your insurance information. And until they get that guarantee of payment from the insurance company, then they release that hold.
Right. And in some cases, I've heard as little as 1,000. I've heard as much as 5,000 to
Correct.
hold.
Yeah, that's correct. About $1,000 to $5,000, depending on the hospital.
Yeah. I know for a lot of people are wondering like what, if I did need to get stabilized and, could you give us an idea of some of let's say I needed to have hip replacement surgery and I didn't have insurance and I needed to pay for that out of pocket and I'm in Puerto Vallarta. And I know that you probably can't give specifics, but what can that run somebody that didn't have insurance?
I mean, like hearts, like a majority of our cardiovascular is stents. Basically opening up a blockage in an artery prior to or after a heart attack, and it's priced per stent because the biggest cost of that surgery is the actual medical device, the stent itself.
Mhm.
So I just had somebody last week get 6 stents put in, most I've ever seen ever.
Wow.
It was like 85,000 US dollars for that surgery. I have somebody in Mexico City right now that's up to a $350,000 bill for a blood disorder. They got discharged just on May 5th and they got readmitted today because he started to have kidney failure. So he already was up to over $300,000 and now is getting readmitted again. So, but a lot of the things like, oh, I broke my arm and I just need to get casted. It's not even going to hit your deductible.
Yeah.
I have bronchitis and I need to see an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Not going to hit your deductible. All that care is very, very inexpensive. I'll give you an example. I went on a hike from Vallarta to Boca de Tamatlan, and I tore my meniscus. So I had to have meniscus surgery done on my lateral and medial meniscus. That was about 35,000 US dollars for orthoscopic surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Hip
Yeah.
replacement, hip replacement is probably going to be around, depending where you're at, 20 to 35,000.
Yeah. So it's significantly less expensive than what you would pay maybe in the
Right.
United States, but it's not cheap by any means.
Right.
Um, so some people assume that because, a lot of people say that the healthcare in Mexico is very affordable, that they don't ever have to save, and then they get caught up in these situations where, they have to pay 10 grand and they have no idea where they're going to get it from. So,
Yeah. It's usually the surgeries, ICU, and hospitalizations. That's where the costs come in. Outpatient care is fairly inexpensive.
yeah. A lot of people are asking about assisted living facilities. I have a blog post where I did a lot of research on assisted living facilities across Mexico that speak English or have English speaking staff and some of their costs. I'm going to include it in the comments. That way you can check it out after we are done with today's show. But I do want to thank my guest, Brett. Thank you so much for being here. You guys, if you don't know who Brett is, he is well known in the expat community. He has helped so many people, has a very good reputation, and you can't go wrong reaching out to him and having him being your liaison in your medical care in Mexico. So I highly recommend you reach out to him. Again, his website is brettlamar.com. I'm going to put that in the comments. And Brett, any closing words for our guest today or for our audience?
No, I would like to just thank you for inviting me. I know we tried to do this a couple of months ago, and I came down with a crazy illness and couldn't do it. So I'm glad that we could reschedule, even though I don't know how I made it, but I'm sick again. But seem to do well.
We're
Uh,
working too hard.
I just want to thank everybody that attended the live, and anybody that catches this up and recorded. Uh, I'm always available for any type of consultations on a one-on-one. It's very, very difficult for me to do in-person meetings just because I travel a lot for this business. I have clients, from here all the way over to Asia. But we have a very good support team that is all made up of bilingual, claims support, renewals department, and all that support us to do our job of servicing our clients. But yeah, like Mariana said, my website, brettlamar.com, it's there in the bottom of the screen. And you can request a free quote on there. And it doesn't cost anything to apply for insurance, just to get an idea of what you might be able to get and the cost of it. You only
Yeah.
pay when you purchase it. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no benefit in you doing it directly with the insurance company and bypassing a third party like Brett. In fact, you actually forego your benefit of having somebody who can explain to you how things work. So I highly
Yeah, it would be
recommend.
a disservice. Mhm.
Yeah. One more thing that I want to point out or want to kind of comment on that somebody mentioned on, and I think it's worth mentioning. We talk a lot about like, paying $1,000, $5,000, $30,000, $50,000 for these kinds of situations where you have to pay out of pocket. And somebody's wondering, are these the same prices that locals would pay? And the reality is a lot of locals go through their employer, get IMSS, which is a kind of like a social security medical service that they have a benefit of because their employer pays a part of it and then they pay a part of it. That is something that you can sign up for. Keep in mind, pre-existing conditions will automatically negate you from IMSS, and there are very long waiting periods for a lot of things. So you really don't get coverage until you've been on IMSS for 3 years. Um, that's really when you get full coverage. And again, IMSS hospitals tend to also have longer lines, tend to have lower resources because it's for the general population. Then there's also InSavvy, which is the free medical care, which Brett and I were talking about earlier, where it's really like the lowest of the low medical care in Mexico. So people who really don't have the means, that's where they go get medical insurance or medical care. So just keep in mind that these prices that we're throwing out, it's for private, great institutions that have the best doctors, top of the line equipment. That's where you want to go. If you have the funds and you have the means, that's where you want to go get care. So anyway, I'm going to just point that out before we close off so that nobody thinks, oh, they're just throwing out these gringo prices. No, that's what a Mexican
Yeah.
national also.
It's also, if you go to these private hospitals, it's just not gringos there. Primarily, you're going to see Mexican nationals there. You're going to be a minority in the hospital because most Mexican nationals that can afford private insurance buy it
Mm-hmm.
because they want access to the private hospitals too.
Absolutely. Yeah. My grandfather is, my whole family is a long line of insurance salespeople in Mexico, insurance brokers in Mexico. So trust me, yes, it's the same notion that if, the people who can afford to get it because they know that these other hospitals are not the best options for them. So yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you so much, Mariana.
And I will see you guys very soon on our next live stream. We have one coming up May 18th at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central Daylight Savings Time. So I will see you guys very, very soon. Thank you, Brett, so much. And
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
BrettLamar.com. Nos vemos
Okay.
luego.